Poke the Bear is powered by Prize Picks, the exclusive daily fantasy partner of the CLNS Media Network.
And welcome into Poke the Bear, episode 245, presented by CLNS Media and sponsored by our good friends over at Prize Picks and Game Time Tickets. My name is Connor Ryan. Once again, we are joined by Ty Anderson of 98.5 The Sports Hub. Ty, how was your 4th of July? You have some glizzies? Some burgers?
It was kind of boring. I'm not going to lie to you. We are planning to see our friends tomorrow, the 6th, which is, it's kind of like everyone, I'm 32. All my friends have kids now, basically, except for me. And so it's harder to make plans, I found. And there was really nothing going on family-wise for me. So kind of just hung out. We hung out. We walked around Boston because we live here in town. And, we got a couple of quesadillas. So not exactly traditional 4th of July cuisine, but a fun day in the city nevertheless. How about yourself?
Listen, what's more American than being able to go out there and have a wide range of different culinary options? Like, no one's hating on quesadillas, I don't think. So what's more American than that? To have the freedom to walk amongst this revelry and still get a beautiful quesadilla. Can't have that in like Italy.
Yeah. So I would argue we had the most 4th of July with our freedoms and our decisions to get whatever the hell we wanted to eat.
This is going to go down a horrible path if we do the Tim Robinson sketch, but no, it's the same here. Low key, I think you get to a certain point where just being able to chill, decompress, and do kind of nothing. We just threw a couple of burgers and hot dogs on the grill and relaxed. Didn't have like a whole bunch of people over. There's bliss to that, right? You look at how hectic things can be. So low key for us. Both of us were over at Bruins development camp at the start of the 4th of July. What's more American than going to Canada's national sport and seeing some Bruins prospects skate up and down the ice at Warrior Ice Arena? So,
second year in a row. I think this is our new tradition, unfortunately.
I know. The NHL just loves to compress we have like weeks upon weeks, Ty, where the season ends, where it's us just talking about what could happen, finding out what's going to happen during the offseason, and then all gets compressed into about 4 days of absolute chaos. So this whole podcast will be us trying to recap, sort through all that happened, about 2 months worth of news that happened in the span of 4 days. But we'll start with Dev Camp. Obviously, every year it's more of a, just checking in, seeing how players are as opposed to a real evaluation. That stuff comes in, the fall with training camp and players going to their respective leagues. And again, the Bruins don't necessarily have the most stacked prospect pipeline. So, I mean, having a guy like Dean Letourneau there obviously helped quite a bit. But what kind of stood out to you in terms of like a player or two that you kind of caught your eye over these 4 days?
I would say the continued progression of some of their college prospects, namely Riley Duran, Oscar Jelvik. These guys are you can see them coming along. Even Andre Gassot. You're starting to kind of see their maturation. They're getting bigger. They're getting stronger. Even a guy who is jumping to college this upcoming year, Chris Pelosi, like he looks a bit more filled out than he did a year ago. Right. And that's part of the game for these kids now. It's not just how do you look on the ice? It's how does your frame look off the ice, right? Like you got to get a little bit stronger, obviously, as we all know, when you're going from the USHL to the college game or the college game to the pro game. Like, and so to see their commitment to that, I think is important. It's impressive. And it's an encouraging sign. Like you said, like not a lot of high picks. So the ones that you do make, you gotta make sure that you're getting the right player, but that player is taking it seriously. In terms of their progression, and clearly the Bruins have found some guys who are taking the craft seriously.
Yeah, and I think you just look at the roster, right? You have 35 players that took part in Dev Camp. Only 4 of them were under 6 feet. And it's all like these like forwards like Patra, Cole Spicer, Dan Lockmellis, and Jelvik, who are like Lockmellis and Jelvik are 2 guys who maybe have more middle 6 upside if all things pan out. So you'll take a guy who's 5'10", 5'11" if they have that different kind of mentality. But as you said, like you look at all these forwards they have, like Gassot, who's 6'4", Pelosi's 6'1", but he was kind of known as a high motor kind of player when they drafted him. And you kind of saw that play out. Riley Duran, who, I mean, the Bruins seem like he's like third in the line behind Lysell and Merkulov in terms of NHL reps, which, again, it's encouraging. That's kind of how they mapped him out. But the fact they're already talking about him, maybe making a push this year when you already have kind of a logjam of kind of fourth line players up on the roster right now, encouraging to see that from them. But I just think you look at the Bruins' overall approach, right? Like we've talked about this, I think, last week when the Bruins took Letourneau, of like, good on them for swinging for the fences with a guy that has some risk, right? Like he's definitely a project. I think we definitely saw that this week of you see the potential, you see that he's pretty raw. He's going to need some time to fill out there, but you can afford to take one of those kind of players who maybe have that boom or bust potential when you look at their strategy of just, size on the blue line and forwards up front who have some size but have high motors and can be effective on the forecheck, inject energy. That kind of those two traits, right, in terms of your forwards and your defense, like you're creating guys who have a pretty steady floor, right? Like, again, are all these guys going to go to the NHL? Of course not. But if you're getting these guys in like the 7th round or the 5th round that become at the very least productive AHL players and fill out your roster there, and one of them can make the jump, or a guy could eventually be a third pair physical player or a steady bottom 6 player, you'll take that when you look at just how barren or how few opportunities this team has had to really swing for the fences and add guys. Like they've made the most of finding an identity, crafting their farm system towards what they're trying to draft.
Yeah. And obviously a guy like Letourneau is the outlier, like that a lot of these guys seem to have, trying to find the way to say it. Like they have safe ceilings, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's like, okay, this guy's gonna be a dependable third liner, fourth liner, maybe can be like a Danton Heinen, can move up to your second line in a pinch kind of deal. Not a lot of them have that. This guy, if everything works, is a bona fide top 6 impact kind of talent on your roster. And so we talked about this, last week. It's like, you got to be patient with that kind of player. And that player is going to go through different sort of, okay, I'm this kind of guy, or I'm that kind of guy. Talking to him this week one-on-one, everyone was talking about, you're Tage Thompson. And he was kind of like, he's like, to be honest, I watch more Leon Draisaitl than I do Tage Thompson. Like that's a guy that he looks at and says, I want to be like him. And, the second overall pick from 2014, incredible player, as we all know. It'd be great if he hits that. Probably not going to hit that, let's be honest. But, it's funny that when we try to box somebody into, you're this guy, that same guy goes, no, actually, I'm more like this guy. I like playing like him more than I like playing like Tage Thompson. So I think that's kind of funny. That's kind of interesting to me. But yeah, I mean, you got to produce some talents out of here. And that's such a simplified way of looking at it. But like, look at the late era of Tampa Bay Lightning hockey, right? Like that produced Yanni Gourde, who was undrafted. That produced Ross Colton, who I believe was a 5th round pick, I want to say. Yeah. Like the late era of those teams didn't have picks either, but they got guys that were valuable contributors in some fashion. And we're kind of entering that final window of that for now. The Bruins are going to start having picks again the next few years. Whether or not they keep them, that's anybody's guess, as we all know. But in the now, like some of these guys that you're talking about, they got to hit. And so Dev Camp is a nice check-in. It doesn't mean much. It's summer, like things can happen, as we all know. But I would say off the jump, when it comes to Dean Letourneau, like we're looking at a guy that clearly has some work in front of him, but the overall framework is encouraging, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. I think you look at it right. It's something where I think it was preached very early on. You look at this guy who's 18, could put on another, 25, 30 pounds when he's all said and done. But again, you like it. I feel like there was some people who like mentioned like, this guy's getting knocked off the puck quite a bit. This is a guy who's, skating still not there. It's like, he's still a project. And I think it's also like the skating's not there. Like he had a few stumbles during like technical drills and stuff like that, where I don't think even 18-year-olds are necessarily working on those kind of things. I think his overall, like his stride's good. He has good acceleration. I think like, especially like his shot, but also like, just like he doesn't seem like encumbered by his frame, right? There's some of these guys where they're kind of just they're either hindered by just how big they are, or they still like don't have like that touch with the puck. He's good at like, handling pucks, kind of working in tight quarters. He had a couple of really good plays on Thursday during 3-on-3s where it didn't have a lot of space and just has that reach where you can kind of make something happen out of nothing. So you look at like what he already has kind of dialed down for a player that size. It's encouraging. It's all about just taking those next steps, but also like those next steps aren't anything that is like a reach for what you're expecting. Like this is a guy who, again, he's probably going to take his lumps next year going from prep to Boston College, a national championship contender in probably, the best, league in college hockey. Like that's to be expected. But you look at like what he needs to do. It's all about the things that every young player has to go through, like putting on weight, learning, dealing with the higher pace, dealing with the added physicality. It's not like he's a project, but I don't think there's anything in there that is asking way too much in terms of what he needs to do, right? Like, it's not like this guy is 6'7", but man, he needs to work on his skating. Or like, man, this guy he handles a puck like a grenade. Like, it's not anything like that where you're like, all right, this guy really needs to dial down these things. It's all just the natural progression. But by saying that, it also means like, I don't think he's going to be one and done at BC. Like, give this guy who's kind of a unicorn out there the time he needs to really kind of just find his footing, I think.
Yeah, and I think this first year at BC is going to be telling in terms of, okay, what's he doing on day one of Eagles, camp season, whatever you want to call it, and what's he doing by their final game of the year? If they're in the Frozen Four, like is he still in the fourth line, third line, or is he in a top six role? Like that might answer more questions than anything else. Is like, how are they utilizing him? His goal is for BC his freshman year. And they're going to give an opportunity, clearly. If they're bringing him in following the departure of Will Smith, they're looking at it like we think he can be an impact player sooner rather than later. But, is he playing special teams? Is he playing on the PK or the power play? Is he playing more than 10 minutes a night? Is he a regular lineup fixture? He said that his goal is to earn a lineup spot full-time and to be playing special teams. So if he can do, let's say he has a full-time lineup spot, that's box one. But if he can play in the PK, that's box two. If he can play in the power play, that's box three. If he can check multiple boxes this year, then that's a win for him, and that increases the timeline a little bit. So I'm with you that in the sense that I think he's 2 to 3 years. I don't think he's going to be a one and done. It'd be great if he were, but
yeah,
if he is that means that he was like a Hobie Baker, type of talent in terms of production and what BC did as a team overall. So I think he's gonna be back. I'm gonna say 3 years. I'm gonna say 3. But I just really think it's about how do they utilize him this upcoming season.
Yeah, absolutely. He's definitely someone that, again, him being at BC also will be helpful in terms of just how many times the Bruins and any of us will be able to watch him, whether he's playing, BU or any of these other hockey teams. So his development, I think, will be great to watch. And again, I think you expect learning curves and bumps along the way. And hell, if it's his freshman year and he's got 20 goals in 35 games, and all of a sudden that's great news. Like I will be the first to be like, didn't see this coming. And that's a great problem to have, where all of a sudden you have a guy that maybe he only is a year or two at BC and he's ready to make a push there. Again, I don't think that's going to be the expectation, and I will be very surprised if that is a guy going from prep to that level that quickly. But he's such a unique prospect that I don't really know. We'll see. We'll see how that kind of plays out.
I also think it's important to note too that like it's very rare that a guy is a one and done at BC.
Oh yeah,
like it's just rare. Like I Ryan Leonard is staying for another year, right?
Unfortunately for BU. But
Cutter Gauthier did 2 years, right?
Yeah.
Is Perreault going back again?
He is going back, yeah.
So, the guy who was one and done was Will Smith, who was what, 6th overall, 5th overall, something like that?
4th, yeah.
Yeah, like you got to be like a special talent to be able to do a one and done at BC. And not to say that these guys like Perreault and Leonard couldn't go if they wanted to, but like just the overall ability to be a one and done requires something really special. And, if Leonard wasn't a one and done after scoring 30 goals and 60 points or something like that,
I think he was like the most pro ready out of all those guys, even more than Smith. Like I was shocked he went back.
So, there's an element there of like, you got to prove a lot, right? To be able to like truly be that kind of guy. And I don't know. I think it's unreasonable to expect either Letourneau, like internally, to expect that out of himself, or for a program or a pro team to expect that out of him. So I think 2 to 3 sounds right. And so we'll see how it all transpires. But I think the BC program specifically, I do feel like that's a multi-year build, whereas some other schools like BU, I feel like has more one and dones. Like I think they import more talent that is just like, this dude is pretty
They're
close
Kentucky.
to damn ready. Yeah, exactly.
They're Kentucky.
Yeah.
So, it'd be great to see how it all kind of pans out for Letourneau. Before we wrap up Depth Camp, was there any player that you think, like, I think we've got these tiers, right? Of like, we know Patra, we know Lorai, we know Merkulov, Lysell. I think Yelvik is probably in that tier below that, where he's a guy that I think has really kind of separated himself a little bit. Duran. Is there any other like maybe underrated prospect who you're going to be keeping tabs on, whether it's again via people on Twitter sending something along? I know we're going to get a whole lot of highlights as we do every year from the our dedicated Providence prospects watchers who clip everything. They're the work they do in terms of sending stuff along is much appreciated. But is there any player down in Providence or a guy who's going to college that you're excited to see this upcoming year?
Yeah, I touched on him a little bit earlier, but Chris Pelosi is going to be making the jump from the USHL to Quinnipiac this year. I know he's a freshman, and the freshman deployment can always be kind of tricky in terms of how much ice time do you get. But a guy that people rave about, whether it's teammates in the USHL, Beckett Hendrickson, a guy who played with him, and a fellow Bruins prospect, like they say that he's got something here. So I want to see how it translates, and it might be a hard year to see how it does translate. But that's a guy that I'd be watching. The top pick from their 23 class, I do believe. I believe he was their first pick. So that's a guy that I'd be watching closely. And the other one is actually from that same class, which is Ryan Walsh, who I believe is going to college this year, but had really good scoring numbers in the USHL a year ago. I'm forgetting the team he played for, but I remember looking at the numbers and being like, wow, that's more of a goal scoring threat than I thought. So those are 2 guys that I got my eye on this year. Again, jump into the college game. Just looked it up. Ryan Walsh is going to Cornell this year. So
you ever heard of it?
Yeah, it's called Colonel. It's the highest rank in the military. So he's going there. He was in the Cedar Rapids Rough Riders this year, 79 points in 61 games. So clearly got a scorer's touch. So that's a guy that I'm looking at. Those are 2 guys I'm looking at. How about you?
Yeah, I think one guy who, as I said earlier, you're going to get those tweets from Bruins Network, Robert Chalmers, all these people who are dedicated in terms of clipping all this stuff. Jackson Edward, a guy who a 7th round pick, so great value, even if he's maybe just a AHL stalwart, but controlled chaos, I think, is Jackson Edward. They're going to get a bunch of Zadorovs now in terms of these guys that are just absolute chaos on the ice. And again, like what his NHL ceiling is, we'll see. Played for a great London Knights team, run by the Hunters, who have a great track record as well. If you're a guy who's prone to laying out players and causing havoc, having Dale Hunter as a coach is probably a pretty useful resource to have. But he's a guy that, again, I think you look at the way he plays, pretty dynamic player, had more of, I think, an offensive touch than people expected, is prone to dummying players, throwing them into the end board, stuff like that. But at least he'll be entertaining. And he's a guy that, if he develops over the next couple of years in Providence, he could be a guy that down the road could be a really useful 7th D. Like maybe he's a 3rd pairing guy like a Kevin Miller, who's really physical, really punishing kind of player. He's a guy that, especially for a 7th round pick, it's the way the NHL is going, where it's so heavy on speed and skill now. Having a guy with Edwards' game and just that violence, that nastiness to his game makes him kind of an outlier and a rare kind of asset to have. So he's a guy I'm pretty excited to see how he kind of pans out next year.
Yeah, and I know we have to put the qualifiers on it because he is a 7th round pick, and those guys, they're lottery tickets, I know, but Matt Roy from the LA Kings, now with the Washington Capitals, was a 7th round pick. A guy that we've talked about on this podcast before, Jacob Middleton, was a 7th round pick. I believe Mackenzie Weegar was a 7th round pick as well. So you can find these guys, and you alluded to it. That London Knights program produces some extraordinary pricks. They produce guys that play with that nastiness, that edge, that Dale Hunter mean streak. Just top of my head here, Matthew Tkachuk, Max Domi. There's another one who's a real SOB who played there. I'm not necessarily like super mean, but like Bo Horvat. They produce these
prickly guys.
Yes, exactly. And so it's not going to have to be taught to him, hey, you got to be a mean MFer. He's going to know how to do that. He's already been that kind of guy in the OHL. And so, and I love what they've done in Providence this year in terms of helping those guys out with some legit nastiness. We're going to talk more about free agents later, but these were, Billy Sweezy's a guy who plays with that edge. He's going to be on the back end down in Providence. Jeff Aiel is a guy they brought in who was in the NHL a couple of years ago. He fought Chara. That's how willing this guy is to fight and to plant his skates in the ice and say, I'm here. He fought Chara. So they've restocked their Providence pipeline with some tough guys to ensure that some of these players, like a Jackson Edward, like a Freddie Brunet, who played a lot last year but is still kind of young, that they have some protection and some insurance for when they're out there and trying to assert themselves as who they are. And for a guy like Jackson Edward, he's going to have some guys that are going to come calling saying, you think you're tough? Let's see.
Yeah, no, it'll be fun to watch. There'll be no shortage, I think, of it'd be like when Frederick first got to Providence. I feel like every week it'd be like Trent Frederick had 5 fights this week and was just fighting everyone.
Dude, that was like Kuntar was like that this year.
Yeah.
It felt like.
Yeah, exactly. So definitely fun to watch all that goes down in Providence and the various leagues across North America and Europe with this Bruins prospect pool. Ty, we're going to shift gears now and look at free agency, which happened. It feels like it was 5 weeks ago, but it was just on Monday. But we'll break that down. But before we do that, let's take a quick break. Hear from our good friends over at Prize Picks. The NBA Finals are over and the Celtics are champions, but there's still so many ways for you to get in on the action and win up to 100 times your cash on Prize Picks, as you and the world's best players take the game to a whole new level on the court, baseball diamond, and much more. With Prize Picks, you could turn $10 into $1,000 in a single game watching your favorite sports this summer. You can make a Prize Picks lineup in as little as 60 seconds. You just need to pick more or less on 2 to 6 players' stats projections, and you're locked in. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Get on the daily action, your friends, and become part of the Prize Picks community today. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and a huge selection of players and stat types are what makes Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. With the finals over, the hoop action doesn't stop on Prize Picks. Women's basketball is still heating up. With stars like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese looking to make names for themselves, alongside greats like Brianna Stewart and Aja Wilson, you could win up to 100 times your cash watching them ball out. There's no shortage of ways to participate in Prize Picks. This week, I'm selecting Caitlin Clark for more than 25 points and Tanner Houck for more than 7 strikeouts. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, use code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Now, let's get back to the show. Shout out once again to our good friends over at Prize Picks. All right, Ty, free agency. Bruins were active early on as soon as it hit noon, even though it felt like everyone had already announced who they were signing with at like 11:15 because everyone talks ahead of time anyway, so nothing really matters. But anyway, Bruins come away with, say probably the best center on the market in Elias Lindholm. And if not, probably not the best overall, but absolutely probably the most intriguing in terms of his skill set in Nikita Zadorov. And again, they had some other pieces. Max Jones, a pretty physical guy who's going to be in that mix for the fourth line as well. But just as a sweeping kind of summary, what was kind of your overall impressions of what the Bruins did in free agency?
Yeah, I think the Elias Lindholm trade was signing was a very obvious one in the sense that they had tried to trade for him multiple years now. It was a multi-year quest. And once you can get that player for money, alone and not have to part with first round picks and second round picks and prospects and all of that. Like, it just made it a no brainer. And Don Sweeney basically told me as much, that, they felt they were close over time, but by the end of their pursuit, they were kind of offering packages that didn't really entice Calgary because their cupboard was so barren. Right. And so kind of natural fit. You didn't hear much about them being in on Sean Monahan. You heard Chandler Stevenson, but not that strong. And then you look at that contract that Stevenson gets in Seattle, and you're like, well,
don't know what the fuck the Kraken are doing, man.
Like, what is the plan there? Yeah. And so, it just made sense, right? It was a natural move that ultimately made sense. And so, not surprising at all. I think the real surprise was that, we spent, God, how many shows did we spend going, they're going to get a center and a winger. They're going to get a center and a wing. They might need to get two wingers.
Mark Trousseau.
Yeah.
Claire. Yeah.
We went through every effing player that was imaginable to talk about that they could get on the wings. And then they throw us a curveball and they go D. And so it's really interesting that their two long-term commitments were at left shot D and at center, one of which being obvious, the second one being obvious, but maybe not at that price point and that term. So a bit of a curveball, but I think when it comes to the biggest signing, we had to expect it, right?
Yeah, no, without a doubt. And I think Lindholm, I think it's only natural, right, for people to have some reservations about Lindholm in terms of last year was a bit of a struggle for him, which he even kind of mentioned during his availability with us. Like, you're going into the last year of your contract, you don't have that clarity. The team you're on in Calgary sucks. So you figure out pretty early on you're going to get traded. You go to Vancouver, and he finished strong with them, but was in a weird spot for like pretty much the second half of the year, right? Like, was moved to the wing. It's not really where he's best fit. Gets pushed down to like third line center because you got Pettersson, you got JT Miller ahead of him. Kind of just like Vancouver trading for him was kind of weird anyway, in terms of, you saw that rumor in like early March where Vancouver was like, we need Gensel instead. I'm like, yeah, why didn't you save up those assets to get Gensel instead of a guy like Lindholm, who was kind of a luxury on your team? So I understand that, there's reservations about Lindholm in terms of last year and whether he's more of a elite second line center in terms of what his real value is. But you look at what the Bruins need, and the fact that, yes, maybe he is not a bona fide franchise top line center. He's the best one you got now, and he makes your team a hell of a lot better with just him out there. Whether it's him, his presence alone, where it moves a guy like Zacha to the wing, if it bumps Coyle down a line where he can, get easier matchups. He's not facing off against Sasha Barkov every single night or the equivalent of that. And again, I think just his skill set, right? Like the fact that he's defensively responsible, which the Bruins value heavily, put a lot of defensive responsibilities on their centerman. His faceoff numbers, which that was a glaring issue last year. There was how many times in January and February where we'd be like at the Garden after a game where they lose a close one or they give up a lead late, where we're like, wow, like the production's there. What they've missed the most with Bergeron being gone is the faceoff numbers. So you have that. And again, like, I think people are looking at that contract, which I thought it was going to be like 7 times 8. I thought it was going to be over 8 for what he was going to get. And again, 7.75, but you look at what his contract is, and yes, like there's the term involved, but I'm kind of just staying focused in the now of the next 2-3 years, which I think you have to do with free agency, and the fact that the cap hit should go down quite a bit. The way these, I'd rather you give the money to these guys now before the cap jumps up in a couple of years. But I just think you look at Lindholm and what he can provide. Is he going to be an 80-point guy, a 42-goal guy like he was in 2021, 22? Probably not. I think that's probably reaching. But can he be a 65-point guy who's great two-way player? Like, you will absolutely take that. Because also I feel like people say that's like Bergeron light. Bergeron wasn't an 80-point guy. Like, and that's not to say that he's the same player as Lindholm. Like, we know how good Bergeron was, how great he impacted the game every time he was over the ice. But if you get 65 points from another guy and you still have a guy like Zacha, a guy like Coyle, and these other good players who probably were in elevated roles last year, they're slowed down a spot or two. It makes your whole lineup that much better.
Yeah, 100%. And the other part of it too is that, just breaking it down the last 2 years, basically post Gaudreau and Tkachuk leaving Calgary, you know, his production hasn't been great, right? Like it's 58 even strength points over the last 2 years between Calgary and Vancouver, I believe. But when I looked this up the other day, like it was more than Anthony Cirelli. It was more than Tomas Hertl. It was around the same as Ryan O'Reilly and Jordan Stahl. And the great sort of whatever here is that they're going to put him with David Pastrnak. They're going to put him on their top power play unit. And you mentioned it. It's going to make everyone around them better because the matchups they're going to get now, right? Like it's not going to be 7 games of Charlie Coyle going head to head with Alexander Barkov, which is not a matchup that Coyle can win. He could maybe break even, but he's not going to win that matchup.
Yeah.
That's best case scenario. I think with Lindholm, you can maybe break even a little bit more given the two-way know-how and the trickle-down effect of having that kind of matchup. And so I think what's important to note, and I think I've said it here before, and if I have, I'm sorry for repeating myself, but like the Bruins were not bridging the gap up front between themselves and Florida on July 1. It wasn't going to happen. The best they could do was try to even the playing field a little bit more in terms of their defensive know-how, slotting guys into proper, more advantageous spots, and then going from there. And so for me, adding Lindholm and fortifying your fourth line to have a bit more jam and physicality and tone-setting presence, and, Kaslik, another guy that can win faceoffs on the right side of the ice, like that's important to me. So I can't be a hypocrite and say, they got to get a center. They got to get a center. They got to get a center. And then they get one using the only method that they really have to get one and then go, no, I don't like it. So I like it because I think it slots everyone into their proper spot or closer to it. To your point, or to what you said off the jump, yes. If and when this Bruins team wins the Stanley Cup, I think Elias Lindholm is your second line center. I think that's probably where he is. But this is a start. This is the start of a multi-year load up that I believe that me and you believe they're going to do, where if there's a center to be signed in 2025, I think they're going to be there too. I really do, because of these things that we're talking about. And so I can't hate it from that standpoint because I think it gets you closer. It doesn't elevate you above them, but it gets you a lot closer than you were on June 30th, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think I've made this comparison a couple of times, but I kind of view the Bruins as kind of like the Golden Knights pre-Eichel, where it's like they had a lot of guys down the middle who were more than capable, right? Like William Karlsson, Stevenson, all these players who are great in their own right and can absolutely hold down the fort. But they're going to be keeping tabs on whoever else hits the market. Oh, you're not happy in your current spot? Or they're dangling you on the market. This guy really is going to hit free agency. They're going to be involved in all that stuff. And again, you look at like the 7-year term for Lindholm, where it's like, well, you're going to be paying him 7.75 when he's 35, and is he going to be a third line center? If the cap jumps up to like 112 million by 2029, 30, wait till you see what third line centers make, right? Like that's the thing. Like that's why you look at like now with that contract, you look at like whatever Swayman's going to eventually sign for, what you hope is long term, and locking him into 7.5, 8 million, something like that. It's going to look really, really good. The more like the cap is really, I mean, barring some catastrophe, it should be jumping up pretty steadily of like 3-4 million per year next 3 or 4 years. So I'm encouraged by that. Yeah.
So talking with somebody who knows more about this stuff than we do, and they were happy to share with me some information. The cap is going to go up dramatically next year and the year after, and potentially the year after that. Utah is the great sort of unknown here in terms of how much revenue will they help kick in, but it's a big reason why Arizona to Utah made a lot of sense for the league and why they were kind of eager to do it. You have the TV money that's been kicking in. And this number blew my mind when they told me this was, that since they were introduced into the NHL, Vegas and Seattle are top 5 in generating money in the league. I mean, these are new locations that are printing money for the league. The fan buy-in has been spectacular. The stadiums are bumping every single night. Like, they're printing money. And so the belief is that Utah will do the same. Now, Utah has a lot to work on in terms of its arena. They have a lot of obstructed views and things like that. But the fans are in. Like the fan base is already bought in, already developed. And so when they get their new arena, say 5 or 6 years down, however long that is, like I think they broke ground on it. I think they're building it or they're going to start soon. That's going to generate even more hockey revenue. And so I think why the league is projected to go to this new stratosphere soon is because they've hit home runs here in Vegas and Seattle. And so if that continues to be the case, which they believe it will be, the cap is going to continue to go up. And so to your point, yeah, like your third line centers and your third pairing Ds, like they're going to be making money that's going to shock people. Just like if you told me 10 years ago, hey, goalies are going to make 10 million. I'd be like, what? Like, what do you mean? Hey, you're going to have forwards making $13.5 million. I would say you can't do that. You have Ovechkin making 8.75. That's the best, that's the best contract in hockey. Like you can't do that. Things change over time. Right. And so long as the cap is going up, it's not going to be this big worry. And so the people that I've talked to about the economics of this contract believe that it's going to age well. And it might be a tad high, but it's not going to be like, oh my God, they got 13% of their cap tied up in one guy and he's a third liner now because he's 35 years old.
Right. No, exactly. So, yeah, I think we're all positive, not surprised in terms of what Lindholm brings. And again, I think he's due for a rebound with a full year next to Pastrnak. So I think just makes the whole rest of the team better. We'll focus in now on Zadorov, who I think probably maybe more fans are maybe more excited about just in terms of the way he plays, right? Because it was more unexpected of what the signing is. Before we dive into that, Ty, take another quick break here from our good friends over at Game Time Tickets.
The Stanley Cup final is over, and what a thriller it was. The Celtics are NBA champions. With hockey and basketball playoffs over, attention turns to the MLB. And is there a better activity to do during the summer than hitting the ballparks? Nothing beats a summer night at Fenway Park, a Fenway Frank, an ice cold beverage, and the crack of the bat. It's a nice change of pace from the heart-pounding intensity of the NHL and NBA playoffs. Just pure relaxation, good weather, and great vibes. I feel like every year I make a slew of fond memories at Fenway. For me, last year it was in Chicago watching the Red Sox take down the Cubs at historic Wrigley Field. Gotta say, Cubs fans, very nice people. Want to go to a game this summer? Go check out Game Time, the authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. That's right, they go down. I love how easy to navigate the app is. The flash deals are awesome if you want to go to a game last minute. It's the perfect place. Save up to 60% off buying last minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. Not to mention the views from all seats in the venue. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Now, back to the show.
Shout out once again to our good friends over at Game Time Tickets. All right, Ty, looking at Nikita Zadorov, a player who's has the title of maybe the most imposing figure in the NHL. Hits like a freight train. Very, very physical. Adds definitely a different element to the Bruins in their top 4 on defense. I did the numbers now. I think with Zadorov in place, the average height and weight of the Bruins defense is 6'3", 220 pounds. So definitely adds a different element there. What was your overall your take on them going and getting a guy like Zadorov on the market?
Well, let's start with the idea that he's basically a full-time member of this team. I don't think it was possible to have a greater height discrepancy going from one guy to another than it is going from Matt Grzelcyk to Nikita Zadorov. So if you're a sizist out there, if you're a big believer in tall blue liners, Zadorov is your guy. And I like what he can bring from a tenacity standpoint. I like what he can bring from an attitude standpoint. And I think it's probably similar to Pat Maroon when, talking to players when they added Pat Maroon, it was a sense of everyone feels bigger when he's out there. And so Charlie McAvoy will probably feel a bit more, imposing knowing that he has Nikita Zadorov to his left. Brandon Carlo would probably feel a little bit better, going into corners and retrieving pucks with the forechecker bearing down on him, knowing that if a guy tries any nonsense, Zadorov's going to be right over there. And so it's going to help Mason Lowry, the odd chance that it's a lefty and a lefty out there. Like everyone's going to feel better having this guy out there. And so that's important about his addition. Also, going back to what we talked about earlier, like this is them emphasizing defensive, maybe realizing that they're not built to outscore teams. So maybe they got to focus on trying to win games 2-1, 3-2, but having the personnel in place that allows them to do that more effectively and less sort of, we talked about this all the time last year, white knuckle, high wiring kind of act where you're like, oh my God, are they going to hang on? Like this maybe allows them to win those games a bit more comfortably, knowing they have a 6'7", 6'8" guy back there who is physically imposing and also improving as a defenseman.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing I took away from it. Because I think when you first heard, I think it was last week before free agency started, the Bruins were interested in Zadorov, and I was like, I don't know, because I think you have that label, because I think we've seen multiple times, especially during his time with Colorado or early on with Calgary, where would go for a big hit, would kind of freelance, put himself out of position. There was that one game in Calgary, right, where the Bruins played, where he sized. I'm trying to think who he hit. Was it Zaka or someone? He went out of position for a hit, led to an odd man rush, led to a goal for the Bruins, and sparked a late comeback in that game. It was that West Coast trip where Ullmark had the goalie goal, I believe. So he's been and again, that's not to say that's going to be completely negated, right? He's still going to have games or plays where you're like, what are you doing there? But again, if he makes up for it in terms of not just his physicality, but I think when you listen to Don Sweeney right after free agency ended or their main spending ended, they kind of view, I think, that Vancouver playoff run as kind of what they think they can get out of him. Maybe not 8 points in 13 games, but a dynamic player. He's more than, I think, in their mind, just a physical tone setter. And I think it's also important that even before, he maybe took that next step forward over this most recent playoff run, he's a big dude, obviously, but he's not this traffic cone or he's this very anchor out there that he takes a while to get rolling. He's a really mobile defenseman. When he was drafted, he was known as a 40, 50 point defenseman in, the junior leagues as well. So he can move. He's really actually underrated in terms of his transition game, really good at retrieving the puck, good at exiting the puck, with it on his stick, which is encouraging. That's a guy that you look at, when Charlie McAvoy, I think, was at his best is when, him and Grzelcyk were so good together. It's that Grzelcyk could retrieve the puck, get the first pass, get going. And that made Charlie McAvoy that much better. Zadorov does the same thing, just in a different way. Zadorov is just so big that he can retrieve the puck. Good luck knocking the puck off of his stick, and he can just kind of ferry it through. And if you have a guy like that who is that size, who can make life easier for McAvoy and get him going, and Zadorov even mentioned this, if McAvoy can avoid doing that dirty work and just look down the other end of the ice and be aggressive, that's when McAvoy's at his best. When we see him activating and bringing the puck down the half wall and trying to make things happen, or he's searching and trying to lay out a guy with a hit, that's when McAvoy is kind of playing free and playing at his best. And a guy like Zadorov should be able to complement that. So you'll take the hits, you'll take all those things that are obviously the hallmarks of his game, but he's more than just he's not a Joel Edmondson, a 6'5" guy who will lay out a guy, but then you'll be like, all right, what else is he kind of bringing to the table? Zadorov can bring more, and I think the Bruins are kind of banking on that by signing him to this deal.
Yeah, 100%. And actually, I had to go look it up. He hits DeBrusque, which then opens the door for Zacha to score.
Yes.
So that's why you were thinking it was Zacha. Transporting the puck is what really intrigues me. Watching more film, breaking more film down on him. He's gotten noticeably better at that, and I think his playoff in Vancouver was really impressive in that regard. Just taking some more chances, but not doing it at the expense of defense. And that was sort of the knock on him in Buffalo and Colorado. And it felt like, man, this guy's gonna be like a one-trick pony. He's throwing his body around, sometimes at the expense of, what's happening in his own zone. So I like the addition from that standpoint. The biggest thing for me is just going to be penalties. Can he curb that a little bit? Because if he doesn't, okay, well, now he's in the box, and now you're putting the strain on Lindholm and Lowry and Peak. And part of the reason why you're signing him is to put those players in more, skill set friendly kind of spots. They are more offensively minded. So if you're taking penalties at the same rate you were a year ago, I believe he was 4th in the NHL, I want to say, in penalties taken a year ago. His penalty differential was I believe the worst in hockey. I think he was a -28 in terms of penalties drawn versus penalties taken. So if he's still in the box a whole bunch, that's going to force those guys to kill more, which is going to negate the advantages of signing him. And so that's something I'm a little bit worried about. However, bringing in Yelich, having Joe Sacco running the PK, I'm sure they can figure something out with the stick positioning, with how he attacks puck carriers that can curb that a little bit. Yelich, I think personally ran a tremendous defensive system in Seattle to the point where like it made guys that are maybe not as good as they looked in Seattle much better. You know what I'm saying? Like, and so that's something I want to see. I want to see how they get him in the lab there and try to say like, hey, don't take that route because you're putting yourself open for a hook or open for a trip. Like let's just work on some little things here, curb it just a tad here, because the Bruins already took too many penalties a year ago.
Way too many.
That's got to be curbed. And so when you bring in a guy like this, everything we've just talked about that we like about his game, we like about his development, it can go out the window if he's still taking 70 minutes in penalties and they're all minors. You know what I'm saying? Like that, that's got to get worked on for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. No, he definitely has some things to work on. There will be those plays that will drive you crazy, but definitely adds a different element. I think Bruins fans are probably excited about just what he brings. He's also just like a fun player to watch. Like it is controlled chaos when he's out there. It kind of like not as chaotic, but like even like you look at, I think it was game 1 of the Bruins Maple Leafs where it was Pat Maroon's kind of first legitimate game really with the Bruins where he's like knocking guys into the bench, challenging players. Like you can get that from Zadorov like every single night. Like he is chaos. He's a fun player to watch. So I think Bruins fans should get excited about that.
If he landed in Florida, we'd be going, oh my God, you gotta be kidding me.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's like a meaner Radko Gudas who doesn't sit on people. So
yes, exactly.
But you look at, Zadorov brings a new element. I think Bruins fans like, the fact that their D-core now is arguably 1 through 6, one of the deepest, if not the most versatile in terms of mobility, size, everything you want. And you've got a great goalie in Jeremy Swayman as well. But the decision to sign Zadorov, where you have, you're allocating $5 million, put you out of the running in terms of maybe signing a top 6 forward, I don't know, Toffoli, Mark Tissot, any one of those guys, even a guy like Duclair who went for a little bit cheaper at, I think was it 375 with the Islanders. So they're out of the running for that. You lose, obviously, Jake DeBrusk. You lose like other guys that add secondary scoring, and Danton Heinen, who I forgot he had 17 goals last year. So in terms of just their overall approach, right, of prioritizing the defense over a middle 6 winger, do you think that was the right call, or how do you view kind of the path they kind of opted for with this money that they had?
Yeah, I think it might be as simple as them realizing that, or not realizing, but saying like, we're going to spend big money on our goalie. We're going to lose some guys. Let's fortify the middle of the ice and the defense and basically embrace being a low scoring, wipe them out defensively kind of team. And so I think for them internally, they probably look at, we're going to get more goals out of Pavel Zacha by playing the wing versus the center position. When I don't hate that philosophy, because there were a few times last year where I think Zacha gave you everything he could at center, but I did think it affected his offensive awareness, if that makes sense. I feel like he was kind of head in the swivel all the time, almost to a detriment. Now it's, hey man, just play left wing and fire that rocket.
Please shoot the puck more. Please just shoot the puck more.
And I think they look at sort of what I mentioned earlier, we're getting Lindholm and Lowry into more offensive positions. I think the Bruins realize that Lindholm has to be more of a guy who touches the puck more, who has the puck on his stick more. His offensive game is more confident when he is shooting the puck more and gets some results. I mean, think about this. Like, think about how many times that we watched Lindholm last year, and we would turn to each other and go, he looks good tonight. and it would basically pretty much always be a game where he had the puck on his stick
On the
more.
stick, yeah.
He's not a begin 90% of his shifts in the D zone kind of guy. He's just not. And that's okay. That's not a knock against him as a person. It's just his style of play. He needs the puck on his stick more. So I think they look at that and Lowry and they say, we're going to get, what do you want to say, 18 goals from their back end from those two guys, let's just say, 9 and 9, maybe one hits 10, maybe one hits 12. So they're trying to replace it by just slotting people in better spots,
Yeah. No, I agree. And I also think they've probably taken a pragmatic look at it, right? Where I think if you're looking for a 20 goal scorer, you can kick that can down the road a little bit, right? Where it's like, all right, we have multiple contingency plans internally right now, right? As far as, all right, we can roll with, Trent Frederick. Maybe he's up for a top 6 spot. We can give him a featured role. Maybe it's a guy like Geeky. Maybe it's like Potter takes a huge jump and all of a sudden he's your second line center and they change things around with that as well. Or like based on what we heard quite a bit from Dev Camp, maybe this is the year they give a guy like Lysell a look, right? And again, like, is that set in stone that it could work? No, but like, please just give the guy a chance at this point. Like, that's a guy that I feel like at this point doesn't have much more to prove in terms of offensively down in the AHL. And you hear about kind of the knocks against him from like what Mujanel has mentioned in terms of like defensive accountability, practice habits, those kinds of things. Kind of spoke pretty highly of him on Wednesday at Dev Camp in terms of like thinking that he's right on the cusp of breaking through there and got a lot better as the year kind of went on. So if you're Lysell and you finally have this chance, and maybe for him, I feel like Lysell is one of those players that's like, all right, I've hit my ceiling. What's next? Like, if he's probably like one of those players that feels like, give me a shot and I'll show you what I can do. Because he's a guy that is great skater, really dynamic player. If he's a guy that you give him a chance, which would be ideal, and he runs with it. And again, this is incumbent on him to really have a strong training camp in preseason. But if he's a guy that can slot into that role and give you 15 goals or something like that, that'd be huge for this team in terms of addressing that issue internally on a cheap deal. So I think the Bruins have internal candidates they can turn to. And again, you've got multiple ones in place if things backfire, whether it's Fredericks playing too high up, Geeky's not in the right spot, Lysell or Merkulov don't pan out. But if all those options do fail, the Bruins can also go into the middle of the year and be like, all right, as is the case every trade deadline, there will be 4 or 5 guys who can give you 15 to 20 goals that are going to be dangled on the market. We can give up assets to get one of those players. If you signed Tyler Toffoli and the left side of your defense is severely weakened and you signed Alec Martinez or a stopgap who's not up to par, if you're trying to find like a Zadorov, especially like guys like Joel Edmondson who are 6'5" and kind of not that great, go for like a first round pick at the deadline. A guy like Zadorov who's 6'6", mobile, and has the standing of arguably the most imposing guy. Those guys, one, don't hit the market. And if they do, you're giving up like a premium prospect and a first on top of it. So I can see the Bruins being like, let's throw the money now at a player like that everyone probably is coveting. And then if all these internal options fail, we'll address things at the deadline if it gets to that point.
Yeah, and I think you just highlighted it, that as currently constituted on June 30th, and there are other guys out there that could have signed, we all know, but they were an injury away from either Mason Lohrei or Parker Wotherspoon or Michael Callahan, like one of these guys being elevated into a role that may be above their 24, 25 ceiling. That's not to say they couldn't handle it or they could be ready, sure, but do you want to put yourself in that spot off the jump because you want to score more? There's a yin and a yang here, right? Like, and so I think that there's a way of them looking at this and saying, if we're going to have struggles and if we're going to be injured, we'd rather have the depth at defense than up front. And so I back that in theory. Now we got to see how these guys look. Like if Fabian Lysell or Georgi Merkulov, or dare I say both, prove that they're ready, well, you just answered a big problem for you. And you look at your roster and you're more willing to risk losing a Justin Brazeau or someone to waivers if you have to do that, which they probably wouldn't. They probably wouldn't. But if they do, you feel comfortable about it. If you were to lose a defenseman and now you got Billy Sweezy whom I like. I'm not trying to like knock these guys, but you get these guys that are not quite ready for full-time work, playing key roles in full-time work. That's a bit more damaging to, I think, your overall season and your ability to be a top 3 team in your division. And so, to your point, like you said it, like it's easier to address wingers and scoring at the deadline than it is defense. Every year, a defenseman goes for a king's ransom, whereas there's always a winger that at 245 on deadline day is had for like a 3rd round pick and like a mid-tier prospect. And you're like, oh, that's not that bad actually. So I think it's the Bruins picking the you've heard the lesser of 2 evils. I think they're picking the less expensive of 2 evils should things hit the fan for whatever reason next season.
Yeah, exactly. And again, we could be running a podcast in January and being like, the Bruins lost another 2-1 game. Like, what the hell? That could happen. But it does seem like, at the very least, you really hope during camp this gives you an opportunity where they give a guy like Lysell a look. And it's kind of what we mentioned before with like a guy like Beecher last year of like, we just need clarity, right? Like, let's find out what they have in these guys. The same thing with like this past year. It's like Brendan Bussey, who's now in this weird limbo. It's like, why didn't you give him a start or 2 to get his feet wet or see what you had in the player, like in an NHL game? Like, give Lysell a look, see if he runs with it. If he hits a wall, if he's frustrated, if it doesn't pan out, then you finally know. And you can move on, or you can change gears there. I think right now it's all about, again, like, I think you'd feel a lot better if like the Bruins were able to get a guy like Duclair for 3.5 or something. I'd give them an A in terms of the offseason if you've addressed and have like some solid options all across your depth chart. There is some uncertainty there, but as you said, if you're able to get a player like Lysell or Merkulov to hit, and again, it's not to say like you're expecting a 20-20 season from these guys, but if you have a cost-controlled young asset who can give you like more skill, especially up front at that price, you will absolutely take that, and it'll be a great problem to have. And it's a great opportunity for a guy like Lysell where the window should be there. Like, the path is more open to him than it was like Poitras last year. Poitras had no business putting together a stretch like that in the preseason and accelerating his timeline. Like, now it falls on a guy like Lysell to really roll with it. And if he's able to hit it, he will have a spot like on this roster come October 8th in Florida.
100%. And there's an element here of like, all right, let's find out. Like, I don't need Merkulov putting up another point per game year in the AHL. I got to know if he can play here. Like, I got to know. Lysell, 1st round pick, 2021 1st round pick. We're going to start to see those guys filter in next season. You know, those who haven't already, they're going to be given spots. And so I like it from the standpoint of like, you're putting the onus on the player to basically say, hey, you want to be here, show it. Like, we're not blocking you anymore. You're not getting roadblocked by like David Perron, or Blake Wheeler or any of these guys that they could have signed or whatever, like there's no JVR in your way right now. Like, it's on you, man. Like, there's a legit opening here in the top 6. And one of you wants to grab it. If you don't, well, then who are you going to blame? You can't blame us. And so I like the idea of putting the onus on the player. At the same time, however, the Bruins coaching staff has to give that person a fair shot.
Yeah,
that's how I look at it. Like, you can't utilize Fabian Lysell the way that you utilized him a year ago, where he was playing 10 minutes. And I'm pretty sure he was playing with like Jason Megna and like another guy that we knew was going to be in the minors. And that's not a knock on Megna, but like, no, play him with NHL talent. See if he can skate with NHL talent. That's what I want to see. He's proven he can play with AHL guys. Look at the numbers. I got to know if he can play with Pasternak. I got to know if he can play with a Marchand and a Coyle, or a Frederick and a Poitras. Like, I got to see that. So I hope that they give those players fair shots with those kind of talents. I was real bitchy a year ago when they gave Merkulov six minutes a night on a 4th line. I said, what is the point? You got 1,000 of those guys. Let me put them with Zacha and Pasternak. Let's see if we got something here. So I want to see that. So it goes both ways. The players got to develop. The players got to show he's ready. But the coaching staff has to give that player a fair shot. And so that's what I want to see in training camp if I'm the Bruins.
Yeah, absolutely. It's now all of a sudden a really fascinating storyline to follow at camp now in terms of these internal guys. And hopefully a guy like Lysell makes the most opportunity. And as you said, Montgomery and his staff give him the leeway where there's going to be bumps along the road to kind of see the forest over the trees in terms of what he could be, whether it's this year or in the years ahead, if he carves out a role. So be interesting to watch once we get to that point. Ty, thank you for carving through weeks worth of news all in the span of a week on this podcast. We appreciate it. Where can we read your stuff? Where can we listen to you on the airwaves? All that good stuff.
Yeah, you can find me at 985sportshub.com. You can also hear me on the podcast, the Sports Hub Underground, with myself and my friend Matt Dolph. That's pretty much it. I don't think I'm on the radio anytime soon. It is vacation season, but it's also vacation season for me in the sense that we've been going hard for so long, man, as you know, that it's kind of nice to not have to go anywhere for a few weeks. Yeah. So I don't think I'm going to be on the air very much, but that's always subject to change. You know, they fire a coach, they sign Swayman. We'll see what happens. So I expect the latter, not the former, just for the record. But you know, you never know what can happen in this world. So that's where you can find me. And how about yourself?
Yes, you can read my stuff over at Boston.com and the Boston Globe. I've covered every step of the way this offseason for whatever late breaking news does happen throughout the rest of this summer as well. You can also find me on Twitter, X, at ConnorRyan_93. So, Ty, thank you again. This is episode 245 of Poke the Bear. You fans have a great rest of your week.